that we do it is by responding to queries from the community. And we get about 5 or a half dozen every month, ranging from questions about family history. Gee, I had an ancestor who was born in Falmouth. Questions about property history. Geez, I've lived in this house for 60 years. Can you tell me the story of it? Or sometimes it's, I just bought this house. Can you tell me the story? Or queries about local events. And I think this is the most fun part of what we do, because every one of these requires that we do some kind of research, which turns us into history detectives. And one of the most powerful tools that we use to just solve those mysteries and then to provide the answers to the people seeking them is maps. So today we're going to talk about maps. So maps just are pretty simple. I mean, at the most basic level, the map is a portrayal of the Earth. And that doesn't change very fast in most places. But then we gussy it up with all the things that are done by humans. Roads, buildings, sometimes things which do affect the topography, dams or stuff like that. And because that is something that's fluid and continuous, a map is a snapshot in time showing us what a place looks like. Now, we've got lots of records that we rely upon to tell us about history, but the neat things about maps are they cover a huge swath, usually a fairly large area, and they bring all kinds of different information together, which you generally don't find elsewhere. So, of the folks here, how many of you are doing any research on your family history? Okay. How many of you are doing any research on, maybe are you curious about the history of where you live? Particularly when you're dealing with genealogy, and you start digging into the past, and anywhere within Cumberland County, you'll very quickly meet your nemesis, fiber. And the problem that we have is just a huge number of the records. Even Falmouth is an immune from that. Even Town Hall had fire. An enormous quantity of the records, particularly those in Portland, which is burned now, I think, 5 times, pretty much completely. Any of those records were destroyed over time by fire. There is one big exception. Through whether it's an accident of fate or just careful management, we have the deeds from 1635, which was then actually, this was York County, all the way to present, pretty much intact. So even better, they're online. They're accessible from the comfort of your sofa. So as a result, if you are ever trying to explore the history of a family in Falmouth, or you're trying to, again, discover the story of your home, sooner or later, you're going to find yourself pouring through the records held by the registrar of deeds. Deeds can be challenging because they happen to refer to objects which aren't there anymore. At a big pine tree located or along a stone wall, except that stone wall got demoed when somebody built a new house there in 1942. Or they refer to the bounding the neighbors on the boundaries, assuming that everybody knows that it was the McGillicuddies that lived along the east side of the property. if you dive into these, it's very easy to get lost. And just as if you get lost in the woods, compass and a map are what are going to help you out. And so they really are indispensable, no matter what kind of research that you're doing. Particularly, our favorites are atlases, and a particular kind of atlas that combines the who, the people, the where, shows the land, and the what, often showing its buildings and businesses and all that kind of stuff. All that put together sort of gives us, I'll use this term often, a Rosetta Stone to being able to solve these and all manner of other kinds of questions that arise. What we're going to do today is look at the maps that our volunteers in the local history committee use when responding to those queries from the community. And we're going to do this by looking at them sequentially, traveling back in time. Is there anybody in this room who has never used Google Maps? That's the place to start. And there are a lot of mapping applications that are out there. But from our perspective, first of all, Google's maps are pretty good to begin with. They've invested a lot in their digital cartography, but they also have some special sauce that makes them particularly valuable from our perspective. Because, okay, so you get your map and you look at it, and many of them even allow you to bring up a view with aerial photography. So you're looking at, you've identified the building that you're interested in, or the site of something that you're interested in, and you're looking down on it from above. And all that does is what your appetite for more. So, of course, the first thing you want to do is hop in your car and drive over there and take, well, most of the time you can do that without leaving your armchair. Using Google Street View. Who here has used Google Street View? Everybody. Okay. It has a couple of advantages. You park in front of somebody's house, and you're out there staring at their house for about 20 or 30 minutes. Maybe the chances are you're going to have a nice gentleman from Falmouth Police Department show up and ask you, "Oh, excuse me, ma'am, can we help you?" So you can walk back and forth virtually using Street View. There's one other thing. Some of our favorite houses to look at from an historical perspective, they got bushes in front, or trees, or some kind of foliage obstructing them. And you don't want to wait 6 months until the leaves come down. Well, it turns out that Street View, not many people I think know this, Street View allows you to look at previous Street View visits. Up here on the screen, on the left, it's sort of hard to see. There's a little box usually up in the upper left-hand part of the screen. You click on it, it will let you choose which year of visit you want to take a look at. This, of course, is the Falmouth Historical Museum and Heritage Museum, rather, and they visited a total of 6 times between 2007 and 2019. And you can't see it very clearly because the screen's not bright enough, but it turns out it's an autumn and you can see more stuff than, and it's a little bit of time travel. That's our new sign over there, which you can read from the road. That's our very handsome old sign, which people who are traveling at least within 20 miles an hour of the speed limit, rocking down with road, we're totally unable to see. The other thing which is handy about Google or any of the search engines, if you're looking at property, is if it's a residence, let's face it, everybody in New England, in their heart, is a snoop. And the greatest thing to satisfy Snoops are the fact that real estate agents now post pictures showing you how great a piece of property is. One recent piece of property that was sold was built in 1732. An amazing amount. They had 46 pictures posted. And as we're looking at it, the first thing, I don't even take a ruler out. I can tell you from the width of that floorboard, that was a mast tree. 1732, it was a capital offense to take down mast trees. They were reserved for the crown for king ships. And maybe that explains why the fellow in there served in Washington's army during the Revolution. But again, floorboards were original. They even got some of the door hardware is original. But again, as this happens more and more often, you can, as properties are out there, you go out there and you can get inside and look at them. So that with Google, is you now know where the place that you're looking at is and what it looks like today. Our next step is the current Falmouth Town Plat. How many of you have been to the Town Plat? This is, so if you go, so Falmouth, along with most of the other jurisdictions around here, use what's called a geographic information system. And they're not identical, but most of them are very, very similar. So if you use one, often the menus and everything are pretty much the same. First, you go out there, you can search for property by address or by the name. You can bring it up with, and by the way, that's the, again, it's hard to see. This is the whole town plat here. And there I'm zoomed in to showing just the library and make it more interesting. I told it to switch the base map to a current aerial picture. I mean, we've got a variety of different base maps that you can use. It's got other tools that are handy. For example, you can draw lines, measure distances in new areas. For example, I looked at this, oh, there's the lot, but they now also in that lot there, and we see the whole property. Oh, that's now 2.2 acres. The addition of the other quarter acre that they have there. So lots of tools that help you examine property in Falmouth, in Portland, in most of the jurisdictions around here. If you get out into the Hastings and Maine, you'll find that instead of having a geographic information system, what they will do is publish the town plat, usually as a bunch of Adobe Acrobat PDF files, which is still there. You can download them and examine them. But in order to make sense out of it, you have to go somewhere else out there and then download the tax rules. In Maine, this is public information. There are a few jurisdictions that are a little funny about it, Cape Elizabeth being one of them. I can't imagine why.
What does the word plat mean?
Sort of the same as plot or lot. It defines or tract. Those are all sort of similar ones, but a plat is a portrayal of a map that shows boundaries, dimension, those kinds of things. Usually with some kind of geographic reference. Another key thing about all the ones that have these graphical information systems, they got property cards linked in. You click on a button and it brings up the property card. The property card is the one that, among other things, it gives you descriptions of the property, descriptions of the buildings. On Falmouth, you can bring up pictures of the buildings. If they're not all the buildings have them, but from somebody who's delving into the history of people or places in Falmouth, it gives you the current owner and usually the last 3 owners, along with the book and page numbers in the Cumberland County Registry of Deeds for their deed, which is serving up to you. Here is your starting point for going to the registry of deeds to research this, to dig back further in time. It's easy to go back in time. With that information, it's a lot harder to go forward in time. So what this does, what the plat does, is it fills in your knowledge of a current piece of property. So between what you can find with Google and what you can find with the town plat, I now know quite a bit about this. Plus, I've got the keys to start going back, researching it using other resources, going back in time. I have 2 cartographic systems. You cannot just download, of course, the Google database, nor can you just download the town plat, but you can do screenshots of them. We'll talk about that later. So you start looking at these, and you get back a few years, and you're going to find that the verbiage in the deed doesn't match any property you can find in Falmouth. And the reason is that when that huge explosion of development occurred after around 1950, it was sort of like they took the town plat, put it in a wearing blender, pushed puree, and then poured it out into in the new shapes. And up here, it's a little, again, it's a little hard to see. What we have is the 1950. Somebody saved it, pulled it out of the wastebasket. Former town officer that rescued it from the garbage pile and donated it to us. And so we have a snapshot of the town plat in 1957 before the building boom really hit. And we've got over here, and it's very, very hard to tell in this projection, we've got the same rough piece of land shown. And if you had it up close, you see, well, some of it's the same. There's a little box right here on the current plat, and there's this same little box is there. But then you start looking around and saying, oh, this is entirely different. Or over here, this consisted of Dolly. Well, it's way different. Obviously, this one combined parts of 1, 2, at least 2, and then gave up another part. So this is often our next step as we start digging back in time. So we go out and see what did the plat look like back then. And then we compare it very carefully to here. And often we can find out, oh, well, it's a piece of this one and a piece of that one and a little bit of that. Because it's usually easy to reconstruct it along lines if you know what it looked like. It's trying to do it from the deeds, the verbiage of the deeds. It needs some bound language because tries you to drink. So this is not available online. We have it up at the museum. You're welcome to come up there either when we're open or just make an appointment and take all the pictures. Or if there's some piece you want a picture of, just send us an email. We'll image it and send it back to you. Topo maps. So we had the big 3: the where, the what, and the who. The topo maps don't have the who. They show us the topography of the ground, and they show us roads, and they got to show us all the buildings. No names. But then you go take a look at that 1957 town plat, and there we've got boundaries. We can marry that up with the 1957 historic topo maps, and actually, okay, we're cooking again. We can start making more sense of this, particularly because we're now back into the time now that the 1950 census has been released, that you can start adding data from the census to build a more complete picture of who is in the neighborhood. So you look down there at that one and say, oh, the person that lived in that particular, now I see, that was the only house that was located along that particular stretch. And I can tell from this, that everything else, that it was the Smith family. Okay, Smith, okay, this was Smith Shaw, he worked downtown, but he lived in this old farmhouse that he inherited from his mother. Okay, now we're starting to build a picture of who these people were. But again, it helps when you've got the, again, all the different parts, again, who, the what, and the where. Again, one of the things that it also shows you, and the reason it's highlighted here, is it shows old road names. And by the way, I did not highlight all of the old road names. So for example, this is Falmouth Road. It used to be West Falmouth. This is now Woodville, all the way over there, except from here to what's now Woods Road was Clayton Road. Woodville was Woods Road, came up here and went down to the corner there. And then from here up to what's now Wynn Road, it was Durham Road, and what's now Wynn Road was then Cumberland Center Road. And you say, well, this is Lake Road. What was Lake Road back then? It was Underwooded Road. Which was really under Wyatt Road. It was not to the number of you see. It sounds like Backwooded Road dumb. The names are stupid people, but no, it was that the road was not to the regulation. Yeah, but that's something else unique. Oh, and you look at this. So we've got the 44 one here and the 56 one here. Between 1944 and 1956, they paved Field Road. And from the looks of it, since these two don't quite match up, I think it moved a little bit. Stuff. Nautical charts are all about water. They are aids to mariners to keep them from running their boats up onto rocks. So if you're interested in property history, you think, well, maybe there's not that much there, but it does come with some surprises. We're looking at the 1870 nautical chart, which shows the lower port side. And there's a surprising amount of detail over there showing those roads. Now you get back on the corner, and here there'd be dragons. There's not much to see. But right along with those is surprisingly good quantity of data and or rather information. And it looks to be pretty accurate. One of my favorite maps is the nautical chart of Falmouth Harbor. Keep in mind, back then, Falmouth included Portland, South Portland, Cape Elizabeth, Westbrook, and today's Falmouth. Falmouth Harbor on the eve of the Revolution. And I've got just the corresponding snippet there, but you see, it shows the roads in Falmouth. In fact, it shows the bridge of Sunset Falls, which was not long after it. Oh, that's Mill Creek. I'm sorry, that's Mill Creek. Yeah. Further out the Death Shore. But again, this is the only map we've got of the period that really's got maps, or rather maps showing the roads other than in Portland. And it all places the nautical chart. I will warn you that the nautical charts are on NOAA's website. They're out there, but finding when you want can be a challenge. You have to use their search, put queries in, and it's not exactly the most easy to use. But the data is accessible. Now we're going to transition into atlases. And, I told you a few minutes ago about how great the atlases are because they give you the big three: where, who, and what. And if you have it, one of the all-time best atlases are the Sanborn Map Company's fire insurance maps. They are very precise because, as people keep coming across this, money was involved. These were used by insurance companies to assess liability, potential risk. They show fairly precisely the dimensions and even the number of stories of buildings. They identify the owners. They're very precise in who, what, and where. So they're great. If you're looking at Portland, there's multiple generations of Sanborn maps. They're one of the most useful and detailed tools for looking at Portland or even South Portland. Falmouth, there's only one. It's in 1924, and because the Sanborn maps were only done for urban or suburban areas, it focuses exclusively on the most densely populated areas of Falmouth. And since that time, this was along the Forsyth. They were all the little cottage clusters. They were built up. So the colors, they also threw in, however, they did include Falmouth corners. So the colored ones over on the big map show you which spots they covered. But as you look here, you zoom in, this is Town Landing Road right here, and that's Route 88. And then you zoom in here even more, and you see they show all kinds of information about the individual structures. If you got it, it's wonderful. Not quite as detailed, but still pretty darn good, is the Richards Atlas of Portland, which for whatever reasons included a little slice of the lower Forsyth. Again, quite a bit of detail. It identifies the people, it shows where everybody lives. This one might provoke you beyond because you look, this is from Stewart's Atlas of Maine, and you look at it, and there's very little detail on it. But the details they've got, that silly map has answered more questions we've gotten from the community about things like what was the precise location of a post office or a store at a particular time, and darn it, that one doesn't have it. We were using that the other day we were trying to date when Town Landing Market was up, and they did not show the market in 1894. Now, it could have been, it just missed it. It had just recently opened. But, you're down to a 50-50 chance as to whether or not the town, landing market was open. It's beginning to look more and more like it was around 1900. Now we hit gold. There are two atlases that we use more than any other. And if you're researching your family history and you find them in Falmouth in the 1860 or the 1870 census, you are going to make a beeline for these maps because they have it all. The one with the most information is the 1871 Atlas of Cumberland County. It includes all of Cumberland County on one page. I took this little area over here and then highlighted it just to show it what it looks like blown up again. This is the same corner. This is Town Landing. That's Kelson Road, and this is Route 88. Again, you look at this, and it says, this is Poland. That was useful because we checked it on the track that, okay, she was the widow of John Poland. The information starts flowing out. So they've got the overall map, and then they've got insets for the 4 villages at the time that comprised in the 1870s.
Does this come online?
All of these are online, and I'll tell you how to get to them. We've got one-stop shopping. You can go to our website. We've got links to every map on here except the two that are not online. And I mentioned those as we go on. Drilling back, we have the 1857 map. It's an atlas on one, it's one of those big wall things. But full resolution, you can really zoom in on it. And they also have an inset for Falmouth Corner. Again, if you know you've got family in Falmouth, particularly around the time of those censuses, and those censuses, not only do they have the regular censuses, but of course, Falmouth is very agricultural. They have the agricultural censuses that go with them. They tell you how many cows and horses and sheep and how much butter they sold. I mean, an amazing amount of detail about your family. And this allows you then to geolocate it to a particular spot. And you know, from there, working it through the deeds, you can then pin it to, you eventually can track that location onto the current town plat and drive out there and look at the land where your family lives. And in this town, more often than not, look at the farmhouse where they live.
What was Falmouth Corner?
Falmouth Corner is what we sometimes call the four corners, the intersection of Buckman Road, Middle Road, and Falmouth Road. Actually, Falmouth Corner extended all the way up from there up to along what we presently call Falmouth Road, up to Blunt Road.
So it was the neighborhood, not just the main intersection.
Yes, it was the village center. Keep in mind, Route 1 was a long ways away. Route 1, which actually used to be on Route 88. They did, the current Route 1 was put in at the end of World War II. Now we're going to take a dive into a different category of maps. These are maps dealing with infrastructure. And infrastructure is one of those words that if you mention it 3 times in the space of a minute, like I'm about to, everybody's going to fall instantly asleep. But when you're looking back in the early days of Falmouth, this one's from 1828, infrastructure was a huge deal because bridges and roads determine where people could live. I mean, if you're a farmer, you got to be able to get your goods to market, which means there's got to be a road, and even just as important, there's got to be a bridge. And the other thing is they were wicked expensive back then. You take a look at the budget back then. Today the biggest chunk of the budget goes to the schools. Back then it went to roads and bridges. And because it consumed such a large portion of your taxes, they were really precise. Again, when money's involved, your maps tend to be really accurate. So this was as accurate as you could make it, with 2 guys, each one holding a pole, and the 2 poles were connected by a chain, and one of them held a compass. And they went out down the roads and measured it off again in rods and links.
Are those real images of the buildings?
No, we'll get that one. Here. So on these maps are very accurate when you look at the roads. As you mentioned, they've got some buildings marked on here. Those are approximations. They're landmarks. For example, this one, they've got a big building. They've got a stamp. Put a stamp on it and then stenciled in by Buckman Town. So those were there more for landmark purposes. The locations were pretty rough. But you could drive around most of Falmouth today on major roads, and this would work. You would get down, there's some places, for example, here's Woodville Road. It does not connect all the way up to here. And then we've got, you notice there's these, I don't know if you can see them, but there are these thin gold lines. Here, going up and down. Those were proposed locations for what became, or what today is Route 100, or the Gray Road. At the time, we had what we call, was subsequently called the Old County Road, came off of Wood Road right across from Eureka, right across from Eureka, and led all the way up to Cumberland, pretty much, or almost all the way to the Cumberland boundary. I think, see which one of these. It's hard to tell on here. It might have been this one became the Route 100. It's a pretty straight road. And they drew it on here, and that's the way they built it. And now this has been relegated to a trail, with the last piece of it pretty much no longer. That's part of the intersection, but from about here all the way up to at least about here, it's, you can hike it.
Are each of the maps you're showing us, these early ones, are these unique objects? Were they hand drawn or were they duplicated?
I do not know. I believe that they were unique. The purpose of these was to define what was the work needed to maintain it, because what would then happen is the citizens of the town would be, first they'd be taxed, but then they you know, if part of the road ran in front of your house, you would agree to maintain the road from that point to that point, and your expenses would be reimbursed by the town. I think any of the extreme progressives in Portland would be astonished by how socialist we were back in the 50s. There is another one that is not online and is in lizard shape, but it's the road survey of 1804. They have the original, but it's encased and hard to use, down at the Brown Library, Maine Historical Society, Maine Historical Society. But they have a photocopy of it that you can have brought to your table in the library, and you can refer to it. We've got to find a way to get an image, because we are the notional houses they have on that one, most of them have names of the families that were living there at the time, which is useful information. Again, we got the who all of a sudden. And again, development of infrastructure in Falmouth, the difference between 1804 and 1828 is enormous. And we got one more, which shows only a certain kind of infrastructure. In 1794, Massachusetts, we were a subject of Massachusetts at the time, vassal state, we were required to submit a plan of the town. This was after Portland had broken off, and after Cape Elizabeth, which at the time included South Portland, had broken off. So this just shows Sacarapa, meaning Westbrook and Deering portions, and Falmouth, which were still comprised the town of Falmouth. Again, from an infrastructure perspective, it's interesting because it shows what were the county roads at the time, and where did we have bridges over the Presumpscot in 1794. Not really helpful for you doing it, but it fills in your picture of how did Falmouth grow, because again, it was, for example, this one shows the Quaker Meeting House, and this road right here was known as Quaker Lane in Portland. As it went out here, it became what we now call Blackstad. Back then, it was first the New Boston Road, because Gray was originally known as New Boston, and then it became the the county road to Gray, which is what disappears out here. That bridge and that road caused all the development, including her family's house off of Mass Road, to occur back here, as we had a huge influx of Quakers who were still at the time trying to put as much distance between themselves and Boston.
So the Quaker Taverns on that road.
It's not on it because the upper corner cuts it off.
Okay.
Because it shows that line going by. Oh, I take it back. No, it is. It's right here. I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong line. Yeah, Quaker Taverns right about here.
Okay.
And there were from here to see that's top on. So from Babbage would be about here. So
Quaker Taverns on.
I'm sorry. It was on. Right, Quaker Tavern. That's right. It was on the gray one, and that was not yet a county road. It was only a county road for a short period, and then they ended up moving it because when they put Route 100 in, they didn't call it Route 100 back in 1828. So, few words. How many of you ever looked at William Willis's History of Portland? A few words about William Willis. He was a lawyer. He was a politician. He was a historian. He was president of the Maine Historical Society. But that historian combined with his lawyerly skills produced the ideal researcher for history. And he built the history while there were people still alive who had firsthand or secondhand oral history of the events that shaped this, many of the events that shaped this town. And a lot of records which were later consumed by fire were still available. So he had accesses to resources as he built this history and meticulously assembled it. And again, it's the history of Portland, but for that purposes, prior to 1795, was it 1795 Portland split off? 1795. Prior to 1795, Portland and Falmouth were one, so it includes the history of colonial Falmouth. And it is part, anytime you come to us, any member of the community comes to us with a question about colonial Falmouth, our starting point is William Willis's History of Portland. And to supplement it, he published 2 maps. And this one covered the destruction of Portland by the Royal Navy in 1775. And it's part of our history because at that time, of course, Portland, Falmouth Neck was part of Falmouth. But it's of interest to us because it's got a whole lot of names on it that are people, or families that be prominent in getting them own property out here, and yeah, maybe after the 4th time Portland burned, they started to move out. But a lot of these prominent families in Falmouth also had property here. And so if you're trying to research one of those old Falmouth families and you're trying to sort things out, this is great because it tells you, for the downtown part, it tells you exactly where they live. It even gives, for example, King Street. What was King Street? For some reason, after the Revolution, they decided to name it from King Street to India Street. And Congress Street was Back Street. Now we get to, up to now, we've been talking about maps that are historical. they document the historical record of our town and its people. This map is different. This map is historic. It is a key piece of a historic event that occurred in Falmouth in the 1730s. We go into this in considerable detail in another presentation that's posted out on our website. If you go out, look under documents, and then look for the annual meeting, we have that presentation posted out there. And it goes into the story of the historical background of early Falmouth and basically how it got burned so many times, largely by the French, not largely by the French. The French destroyed Falmouth twice. So Falmouth was destroyed once by local people, but that wasn't complete. Twice completely by the French, once by the British, and then it became Portland, and once by themselves when fireworks went very, very wrong on the 4th of July. But most of those occurred prior to 1711 in the Treaty of Portsmouth. And colonial Falmouth, the English settlers began to return to colonial Falmouth. They found it was just absolute chaos because we had different parties had issued land grants that overlapped, conflicted. It was to use the current term, it was a hot mess. And Massachusetts was anxious for Falmouth to get back on its feet, so they, basically start generating taxes rather than being someplace where they had to send money. So when the people who were duking it out over who owned which land went to the general court down in Boston, they were told, sort it out amongst yourselves. And everyone's amazement, they did. They created actually a non-governmental organization called the Proprietors of Falmouth. And they essentially re-baselined all of the land claims in Falmouth. So if you live in Falmouth today, the title to the land on which your home sits goes back to here. This is the root of that tree. And there are 3 volumes and 2 maps. One map covers the peninsula. The other map covers Falmouth west and north of Portland Peninsula. And if you go and look at the deeds, they refer to names you've never heard of. They refer to landmarks that have disappeared in the midst of time. This is the Rosetta Stone, once again, that makes sense out of those early deeds. And the current custodians of that is the Falmouth Memorial Library. It's currently down at Osher for safekeeping. It's true back to that 1828. That's the good news. The bad news is this thing is marginally legible. You go up and look at the real thing, it looks like something the cat marched on. I mean, it's awful. The people, and the presentation we have out there goes into the details on it. The people at Osher are absolute top world-class experts, imaged it using available light, consistent with certain kind of archival standards, and they were able to lift all kinds of detail out of it. Our hope is at some point that they obtain hyperspectral equipment, because that would allow them to see beneath some of the grime, beneath some, or really be able to pull some of the old organic inks out. It's a non-destructive imaging, but to be able to recover some more of the information that's out there today. This is an amazing resource for us when we start asking, well, where did it all begin? However, it's also difficult to use. If you want if you're researching property and you want to take it back into this one, contact us and we'll help you with it. And the other map that we listed shows ancient Falmouth prior to the burning by the French in 1690. Again, this is based on a good deal is based on information that's no longer available, and this is the starting place. This map and the accompanying narratives that he has in the history of Portland. If you're looking at the early settlers, the people that settled Falmouth in the 1640s and 50s and 60s, this is the place where we go. It does not show the areas occupied by the Ocasisco, largely because they had pretty much vanished by 1675. Between first having suffered terribly at the hands of the Micmac, who kind of viewed them as the local Shaws when it came time to provision for winter, and then horribly the survivors of those have been ravaged by what they call virgin soil epidemics by the English settlers. So it was down to a handful by 1675, and they sort of faded into the mist. To answer your question, all of these maps are available online. All of them are accessible. We have on our website, we actually have historical Falmouth maps page with all of them on there, a description, the references, and a place where you can click and go out there and open up the map. So the first thing you say, oh, geez, I got to have this map. I want to download it. Don't go there. These are maps that have been undergone extremely high resolution scanning by places like OSHA or Library of Congress. Full resolution maps in these can be measured in gigabytes. Moreover, they are not stored in a format that your photo editor, unless you've got a full, extremely high-grade professional, the super duper version of PhotoSmarts, the ones you're paying $1,000 license for, that may have be able to process these special file formats. Now, they lure you with date, and there are JPEG versions out there you can download, but you'll find that you lose most of the detail. So what we recommend is you open up the map in your browser. First, you flip your browser, first you do this on the biggest screen you've got. The bigger the screen, the better. That 27-inch, that's a really good one to open it on. First, you open it on a big screen. You put your browser into full screen mode. Usually that's hitting function key 11, F11. Then in the map, you go into full screen mode in the map application. Usually there's a little icon down at the bottom. The same, a lot of these apps that says use full screen. So now you've got that as full screen. Then you find the object where you want and you zoom in all the way. And at that point, your screen is now filled at the maximum level of detail that it can. Then you do a screenshot. You can do control Windows as control print. There's another function you do. Let's see, it's the Windows button and the Shift key and hit the S. It'll open up a little box. You can snip that way. You take that screen image and you paste it in your photo editor of choice, and then you can crop it and do whatever you want to with it. That's the way you get a neat map. Yes.
We have a question. Someone wants to know if the 1924 Sanborn Atlas is available.
So the 1924. All of them are out there except for the 1957 town plat, which is our library up at the museum, and the 1804 road survey, which is now at Maine Historical Library. All the others are available online. There's one that we don't have linked out there. That's the link to the NOAA pages, the Nautical Charts. I included that one in here. And by the way, this is also posted down on our website and the presentation. And if you click on anything on here, it will take you to that particular map. It's a very active piece of content. I don't know whether it's nature or nurture, but we humans seem to absorb graphical information a lot more readily or quickly than textual information. And that's why we build, that's why we create and we use maps. We need to remember the limitations. First of all, maps are the product of, first of all, some kind of surveying process, which is complicated, coupled with some kind of cartographic process, which is complicated. These are devilishly complicated. Want to have fun and watch your, and have your brain overheat, start smoking. Go look up orthorectification and georectification. Creating, because remember, all these maps are on a curved surface. By the way, it turns out that the curvature of the Earth between our house and a place downtown, I discovered, is 6 feet. It's a lot more than you realize. And you start thinking of the mathematically. So just the process of creating a map introduces distortions and errors, even before you start calculating the kinds of troubles that humans can get into with that. Then we start adding in data from disparate sources, and we make it even muddier. The town plat's an example. The town plat is a mashup of tens of thousands of deeds. By the way, deeds use magnetic bearings. Magnetic bearings change from year to year. Oh, by the way, sometimes they don't know what year that bearing was taken. And so in the process of creating the town plat, they have to smush together all these individual plats, which are described in the survey done by a surveyor against the one for the neighbor next door, which doesn't match it quite, or the neighbor on the other side that doesn't match. Yeah, so just be aware that all maps are intrinsically got some degree of distortions or inaccuracies. And again, as I mentioned before, the more money is involved, the more accurate they tend to be. So these are the maps we use, and your volunteers at the Falmouth Historical Society are ready, willing, and able to help you solve your mysteries using maps. Any more questions?
There is one more from Zoom. Meredith wants to know if we want information about the history of our property, what's the best way to get it?
So the question again, since you're in the back of the room, the question is if you want to know more information about your property, what is the best way to get it? I will tell you what we do, which is we go out there to the town plat or whatever information we have, and then we drill back through these, stopping to bring in the data we have from maps, because those offer wonderful guideposts. And we can take it all the way back to 1635. Before that, it gets sketchy. Even then it gets sketchy. Our house was on a plot piece of land that was supposedly 500 acres. Well, what went out and measured it today, and it's more like 1,500 acres. So they had a little trouble with surveying the wilderness back in 1635. So that's the easy answer. I use the D word, a 4-letter word, deed. And a lot of people find this is intimidating. We're very happy to sit down there and help you navigate that process because we're very, very good at it. And so you can send a query to info@thefhs.org. It's on the screen here, or you can leave a phone message for us on our voicemail, and we'll follow up with you.
does the Historical Society concentrate on modern Falmouth or the historic Falmouth?
Yes, we do both, because there's no Portland Historical Society.
Right.
So if it's and we're not real picky about it. So when there are certain other town historical societies in the area that I know if it looks like it's going to get even close to the boundary or when they split off, they refer them to us, which is fine. We're quick to do that. So we'll help anybody if it gets into an area where, particularly, for example, Cape Elizabeth, Cape Historical has got the original records for the Cape down there. Stuff that we just don't have access to. For things like that, we'll refer people down there.
And then I wanted to know, is the William Wallace book still in print?
So if you go out again, so I'm going to go back to the slide. Oh, wait, go back away. So under here, if you go over to the research, and then it comes down to Falmouth history references, click on that, and it'll bring up a whole lot of books, including the Willis book. And it's a PDF file. I think I downloaded the one. It'll take you out actually to archive.org, where they got a scanned copy of the Boston Public Library edition, which is one of our so you got the index in the back, but it's also searchable, not fast, but searchable as scanned text as well. Sometimes you pick up things that they forgot to text. I don't see anybody having fallen asleep. We're talking about infrastructure and maps and golly and history.
Thank you, David. That was great. Thank you all for coming.
Over the table there, there's most of it is found in the maps that you're interested in learning more. Tools and our collection. There's also a survey if you're interested in any more programs in the library. Feel free to fill that out. Just ask to see what you're interested in the library or whatever programs to you guys that you want to attend.
So is this a book? Is this a group both interested in a specific topic or?
Nope, this is a general.
General topic,
Yep,
okay.
yep.
I thought you said there's also a team.
Yeah, we don't have a group, but I've gotten a lot of interest in genealogy, so keep your eyes up, and we'll have a genealogy program in the future, so.
We would be happy to do that.
Yeah.
Because we've got our volunteers. I joke about it, but a lot of those queries end up with us sending back a itty bitty version of finding roots. When people hit stuff. It's not, we just know what it is. And if it's in this area, in the greater Portland area, that's half of it. And we're also trying to put all that available online, so anybody can. Depending on time, we're actually going to have a how-to guide for research in ancient Falmouth. We get people since my ancestors were born in 1701 in Falmouth. There are no quick people who were born in Falmouth in 1701. This was not a good time to be in Falmouth. It says you should be looking at Falmouth, Massachusetts, or in one case, we tracked the person out and found out they were born in Falmouth, Cornwall, England, which is curious because we were actually in Falmouth as an insult because we were on the losing side of the Civil War. You know that Falmouth was on the losing side of the Civil War. Actually, civil wars, because it's the proper term. So Falmouth was settled by people, originally settled by people from sort of the west of England, who were loyalists and Anglican. Massachusetts was settled by people more from the south and east of England, who were Republicans, Roundheads, and staunch Puritans. And after King Charlie got a permanent haircut, they looked at the map. They decided to do a very constructive interpretation of charter from Massachusetts, and they redrew the Massachusetts state line to actually almost exactly where the Cumberland Falmouth is today. New Hampshire wasn't very pleased with this, but they said, okay, we won't worry about New Hampshire, but they came up here and went town by town and they went off with a few. Falmouth, that town of Casco was the one that lasted to decay. That was in 1658, and one of the first things they did was rename Casco to Falmouth because Pendennis Castle, which overlooks Falmouth Harbor, was the last royal castle surrendered from. It was their way of showing who's boss. They then proceeded to break almost all the other things, one by one. In Peace Street between the town of Casco and Massachusetts. Fun facts, don't touch you in school.
I also have a giveaway of a booklet, which I think is about a painting that was held at town hall. And this booklet was made by the town, so it's not a library
Oh,
thing.
no. Okay, this is, good.
You know more about it.
So we participated.
Okay.
Okay, so this is, so it works, WPA works, project administration effort back in the, was it, in the 30s. A local artist did that big mural over at Town Hall. If you go in front door of Town Hall, it's on the right, as you look there, and there's little vignettes of scenes around Falmouth. And this book tells the story of that, but then it explodes each of the vignettes, and various people in Falmouth wrote the stories about what each of those places are. That's a marvelous book.
Free for you guys.
If you don't have a copy, I suggest.
I was wondering what was going on there. Okay. And because I worked at town hall. And they this map had been in the hall as you go from the council chamber, so to where you register the proof of stuff. And people walk by it every day and didn't have a clue. Well, Tail, who works there, has an interest in art. And he kept looking at that map and he got curious about something about centennial. He got funding to have this map cleaned. You know, he had absolutely no idea who